Okay, let's switch gears a little bit here. This is the portion about where to really fully test this. You want to have a device here. I might not spend time compiling it. Let's see how fast it goes. But here's the part where I want to focus on some of these graphics that I was saying about the app. When you load the app on a real device, you see a splash screen, and you see an app icon installed on the app. We're going to deal with both of those. Now, there's a few parts of this process, and we've seen, I guess, 1.5 of it so far. A while ago, I had mentioned that somewhere in our solution, somewhere in our project, is the place where it stores those icons, where it stores the splash screen and it stores the icon of the app. Can anyone find it or remember where in our project we have those app icons? Images in the WW folder? No, not in the images folder of the WW. Whatever is inside of images will only apply to what's in the app once you've launched it. This is actually sort of beyond it, sort of not metadata, but it's beyond the confines of the app. So it's not in the WW folder, is the short answer. Res. There we go. Res, resources. So let's go outside of the WW folder. We spend like 99% of our time in there. But there's a few things outside of it, like the config XML file, and then these icons. So here in our solution, outside of WW, open up Res, we've got icons and screens. The icons are a little bit easier to work with. We'll do that one first. But inside of icons, we have then Android, iOS, and Windows icons that we could create. And inside of Android, we have these. We have all of these icons. So these are square icons. Let's see, where should we note this? I'm going to note this in the JS file, even though we don't really need to do any JavaScript. But I'll just put it in our notes to have it. You know what? Actually, let me do it old school. Remember when I used to write notes on a separate notepad file? Would you like that better, that I write some of this stuff on a separate notepad, or put it into the code? In the code? To deal with one file, maybe?
In the code.
Okay, in the code. So let's do it in the code. I'll just put it at the end somewhere, even though it doesn't really require. Let's maybe put it outside of the complete function. Hopefully it doesn't crash. See, it wants me to put it in a notepad. Oh no, there it is. Okay, so I'll put some notes here just at the very end. App icons are found in solution or project folder, res, and then icons or splash. Icons folder has icons for each platform. We're going to focus on the Android one at the moment. Basically, Android icons are square. Ping format, transparent, and also specific sizes. So we have a low quality, medium quality, high quality, and I think extra high quality. We have these different dimensions of icon sizes because in the world of Android especially, people have a recent Android device with a nice HD quality screen, or people have an older Android phone that they haven't replaced in years but still works. Over on the iPhone side, it's a little bit more that people get the latest and greatest because the hype machine is very good, I guess. But then for Android, people kind of hold on to them. So we have these sizes should include the various sizes so that if a person installs our app in a variety of devices, the icon will look good and professional and so forth. So some of these are like for the square icon, that's kind of obvious. You know, all the icons are square. Or I guess we should say proportional, because depending on your version of Android, you might have like rounded corners. I know that on these tablets, they all have, in the app icon, they all have like a white background. This is just something ASUS wants to do. You know, if I look at my own device, they don't have that, do they? They're, like the new generation are perfectly round or something. Yeah, these are like round but transparent on my phone here, but ASUS wants to force in like a little rounded corner square white background. So that's where the transparency comes in right here. You have your main little design, and depending on the manufacturer of the device, they may honor that transparency and just have like the icon with nothing behind it, or they may have like a white square, or they may have a little circle or whatever. So we need to create transparent icons. Ping format is one of two types of graphical formats that are transparent, but Ping is just the best one, and it's the one that the documentation from Android suggests, because the transparency there will let you create cool little shadows, whereas plain old, the classic GIF isn't as high quality. And these specific sizes, we can get them out of the documentation, or if we see right here, 36 by 36, 48 by 48, 72 by 72, and 96 by 96. Those are the dimensions that we want to make our icons. So if you further want to mention here, 36, I guess 36 by 36, 48 by 48, 72 by 72, and 96 by 96. Talk about splash screens in a moment. But the icons have those specifications, those requirements. Square, I guess we'll actually put proportional in terms of not a rectangular icon. If you design a square icon, it should fit in the rounded corner template of the device. It should fit in the completely round template of the device. If you try to use an icon that's like wide or tall, something's going to get cropped out. Or it might get shrunk in a weird way. Some notes here as well. I'll say here, pro tip. It's good to design different icons per size. And I don't mean completely different in that my icon, the small one's going to focus on red tones, and then the big one's going to focus on, it's going to have a cat and it's going to be yellow. I'm not saying that different, but I'm saying think about it like this. When I look at a particular icon on a big old screen like this, I literally have more pixels to look at. I can see more detail. I can see the icons of the podcast app that I can count all, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I can count 10 little wave forms on such a big screen. If I'm dealing with, one of these sort of sizes over here, or like an even smaller Android device, I might not be able to see all of the detail. So that's what I'm getting at. Depending on the size of your icon here, this one right here, these two right here, might be the ones with a lot of detail. And these right here, especially this one, might be the one with less detail. What if my app's icon is...
actually go in and design it separately, rather
yeah.
than might make the big one first and then use it as your base for the smaller ones, but you'll remove stuff.
Yeah, I would, yeah, and we will do that, exactly. I might design my CBDB app to be the initials, CBDB. And then a nice big 96 pixel, I see all of those letters easily. But then on the smaller one, I might redesign it to just be C or CB or whatever. Just, kind of cut it down to less content because you have a smaller screen size. Yes?
Will Cordova actually pull the smaller logos for the smaller screen, or do you have to program that in?
All we really need to do once we get to that is add add the icon sizes that it wants, and then when we compile our app, it'll embed it and such. And then when the particular device loads it, it'll know which one to load. So we're not going to need to do any coding for this to work. I'm writing the comments in the code, but for this to work, you just need to give it the icons or replace the icons. We need to give it the graphical assets. We don't need to do anything regarding coding. So I'll make the note here. Add your different icons to your project, compile, the end. That's it. We don't need to do any extra coding about which is the proper one to load up and should I do an if-else depending on the person's size. No, that's all embedded, built into Cordova, basically. Now, what people sometimes do is they make a graphical file, and it's called My Icon, and then they save it and export it from Photoshop into your project, and then it doesn't load it. Well, the system expects these icons to be named these things. So if you add your icons to this Android folder and call them anything else besides these, you won't find it. If you really insist on using your own unique names, you will have to edit the config XML file in the code view. This is totally optional. I would not recommend it. But if you go in here, it's going to mention, yeah, let's load up our icons. Res folder, icons, Android, icon 3.6, whatever. If your icons, if you really need to be called My Small Icon, okay, you're going to need to edit the code here because you've changed the names of the files here. If you want to, you can do that. I will not. If you simply replace the pre-existing icons with those exact names.
So your phones know how to use which one based on the list of the size and says use this one based on size, or is it like a physical too?
Somewhere in the code, most likely Cordova doing it, added some code somewhere that the device knows based on the resolution and size and such of this device, this is the one we'll load. It's kind of automatic. You just need to provide it. Don't change the names. Yes.
I was reading the code that uses names.
If you want to change the code, you have to do it right here. In the config XML file, you have to do right-click. Yeah.
Can we take a look at install plugins just to make sure that we got all of them?
Yes, I'm going to check the plugins one moment. Yeah, so yes, if we wanted to edit the code to name our own icons, you have to view the code of config XML. And let's just confirm that our plugins are the correct plugins. So I'm going to open up config XML, just FYI. Here's the latest version of it for myself. Plugins installed. These are the ones we need to have installed. Barcode, camera, console notifications, splash screen. There's a separate plugin for splash screen to make the splash screen do stuff, like how long does it stay active and so forth. Actually, even just to display a splash screen. If I didn't have a splash screen plugin, but I still added a splash screen graphic, it would ignore it. This is something we did a while ago, and I'll write this in the notes when we get to the splash screen. But we don't need anything extra for icons. It doesn't matter what plugins we have for the icons. It's kind of built into the system. When we get the splash screen, that will matter, and I'll mention it again. Okay, so I think these notes here so far, how many of you up to this point in the semester feel adequately comfortable with coding? That's a trick question. Everyone should be raising their hands. We've been here 3 months together, right? Adequately comfortable. Okay. So how many of you feel adequately comfortable with graphic design, aka like Photoshop? Okay, a lot less hands, and that's fine. I'm not expecting it. A lot of times people come into these classes with a little bit of experience of coding, or they get some coding experience throughout the class. That's fine. That's what we expect. But for graphics and such, that's not quite as expected. However, if you are going to make your own app, and you are your own app design studio, you're the only person, I'm part of VMC Apps. No one knows that it's just me. But they hear about this company, VMC Apps. Wow, they make apps. Yeah, I make apps. I'm the only one in the company. But that means I need to also be able to code it, test it, and then do the graphics, do the colors, do the text. I have terrible spelling. I need to be in charge of all of that. You need to be in charge of all of that. So we're going to do a little lesson, a little segue into talking a little bit about Photoshop. You're not going to become a Photoshop pro today. You need to go take our various other classes that we have here, like the IMCP classes. Those will get you towards being a pro. And once you have the more experience in many of these things as possible, the more full-featured your app will be. It's not just the part about the coding. Yeah, I understand event listeners and all that good stuff, but then I pick terrible color combinations. There's so much that can be taught. But we will have one lesson about dealing with graphics, because I have my task. I need to make 4 images to add to my app so that I don't have the generic Cordova icon. So that when you publish this to the real app store, you don't look unprofessional when someone downloads your app and it's the generic Cordova icon. And then also like the splash screen eventually. So, I'm going to save everything and exit Visual Studio. You can do it if you want to as well, but I need to because I've got my recorder running. We're about to launch Photoshop. I'm going to have Visual Studio eating up memory. So in my case, I'm going to save all. These are the notes one final time. I'm going to save all and quit Visual Studio just to free up some memory. And then I'm going to go to the Start menu and start Adobe Photoshop. Now, I believe we have 2 versions here, Photoshop Elements and regular Photoshop. Photoshop Elements is like the junior version, which is okay, but I'm going to go with the full-featured Pro version. And Photoshop is an example of software that is very powerful, very advanced. It's been around, I think, around 30 years by now. And it's part of a subscription. It's not free. This is one of the things in this class that isn't free. Everything else is. But there are plenty of alternatives out there that are close enough to Photoshop. Have any of you heard of alternatives to Photoshop? There's one called GIMP, G-I-M-P. The GNU image manipulation program. It's basically a completely free version of Photoshop. And it lets you do all the things Photoshop can do. And it's free on Mac and Windows and Ubuntu Linux as well. So that's also been around like what, at least 10 years, probably like 15 or more, right?
Using it similar or it's different?
I don't use it a lot, but when I use it, I feel it's different enough from Photoshop because I'm so used to using Photoshop since the late 90s. But some of you, like, how would you say if you use GIMP, how would you rate it differently between Photoshop? Any opinions?
It's just a different flavor. It's basically, you can do the same function, but maybe not the same way like in Photoshop.
Maybe not the same panels or the same menu items, but you do the same result.
But it's very elaborate. I mean, you can do wonders with it.
Yeah, it is very advanced. It's been around a while, and it's a global project with contributors from all over the world making it better and better. And so if you kind of remember like your keyboard shortcuts in Photoshop, I don't think they're there in GIMP, but you can do what you need to do in GIMP as well as you do in Photoshop. It's just a free alternative. There's also this other software called Pixlr.com, P-I-X-L-R. This is just another alternative that is like Photoshop. I feel this one is a little closer, like visually and such, to the Photoshop interface. It's another free tool. There is the downloadable version that you can install to your system, or the online version. However, I've noticed this has also been around like 10 years. I recommend it in my classes, but this is Flash-based, Adobe Flash-based. And therefore not a lot of browsers even support it anymore because browsers are moving away from Adobe Flash. So I think here in Firefox it won't even load up, but in Chrome, I think in Chrome that's a little bit more lenient for you to open it. So Pixlr, let me try over here in Chrome, open the Pixlr editor. guess the web app is the same, which they've changed this. Go free. So there's like a downloadable version. Then there's the Pixlr Editor Online. Pixlr Editor.
Did you already say yeah?
What's that?
Did you already mention?
Yeah. Hi there, enable Flash. Sure. Okay, I guess. So if you can ignore all those horrible ads, then you get this interface here that is similar to Photoshop. I'm going to do it in Photoshop, but just here's another alternative, Pixlr. If you've got Google Chrome, you have this like online Photoshop, and it's got a lot of the keyboard shortcuts of what Photoshop is. So I'm not going to spend any time here. I'm just noting that also Pixlr, and it's spelled very weird, Pixlr. That's another alternative. It's web-based. You don't need to install anything. You do need a Flash-enabled web browser, though, and at the moment that's Chrome. But then you have the ability to create graphics online, and then, of course, there's a save, and it downloads it off of their server. We are going to use Photoshop. So from the Start menu, you want Photoshop CC 2019, not Elements. Elements, I think it costs about $99, one-time fee. And then Photoshop is part of a subscription, which is what, like $30 per month. There's a student version for $10 a month or whatever. But just be like me and be an instructor and get it for free. But we're going to use the Photoshop CC 2019. So just kind of to get a sense of the class, quick show of hands. How many of you have never used Photoshop before? Just to kind of get a sense of you.
Just to sign in.
Uh-oh. Let's see what happens. Yeah, that's something I just remembered. Yeah, Photoshop 2018 didn't have a sign-in requirement, but it looks like Photoshop 2019 now has a sign-in requirement. So okay, this is going to be a little snag, but you're gonna need to sign in just to use it. So you have Google or Facebook or create an account. It's the easiest way to do this. It lets you use it, but you still need an account, and the Adobe account is free.
So we tested it before.
I don't know if it's tied to your account or if it's tied to the machine. It's the way of the world a lot, unfortunately. They want to identify you so that you can't keep doing it for free forever. So, how many of you do have an Adobe account at the moment? A couple people. Okay, well, if you want to take a moment to create an account here at Adobe, I would recommend it. The Adobe account is free, and it gives you access to the Adobe software that we have on campus, so I would recommend you do it. If you don't want to create an account, I would recommend go to Google Chrome and go to Pixlr. I think we'll be close enough if you instead do it through Pixlr, but I would recommend to go through this process of create account, or continue with these. Yes.
So what is the scope of graphic editor? What are we working with?
What is the scope?
What are we working with graphics? Making new icons and what else?
We're going to make new icons, and we're going to make the splash screens. When the app loads up, there is like an introductory graphic that appears. We want to design that graphic as well. The first half of the lecture we'll be talking about the icon, and then the second half we'll be talking about that splash screen.
Because we do have Paint 3D.
That's another way to do it too. Paint and Paint 3D. So we have these built-in other software here.
We'll do the same thing, like say with this PNG.
Yeah, yeah, this assumes Windows 10, and we've got Paint 3D, and this is a possibility here to do it.
It has like brushes, it has
Shapes,
Okay, vision things.
transparent ping.
What can you find out with the Google?
We can do that too, yeah. We have a lot of options. We can go the completely open source route. We can do the proprietary software route for today. And what we teach at the college is Photoshop as well, so I'm going to go with Photoshop. Oops.
I'm really surprised that there's not some method within Adobe to let your classes sign into these things easily, more easily than this. There's got to be something out there.
Unfortunately, you haven't been in the email chains with our IT that is pulling their hair out, because there is no method just yet. Adobe really is feeling their way through this. They've been having this cloud version for years, but now, like 2019, they started with like, we need everyone to log in. And so like corporate environments and educational environments are pulling their hair out, because it's like, why don't you just give us like an easy, here's a student email access for everyone, just log in with this one generic account. Well, yeah, because I can log in here, and then so can my mom and dad and friend and everyone everyone's a student that I give that email to. So it's a little bit of a runaround nowadays, but we'll make the most of it.
So when we do this, we're going to do 300 pixels per page.
Well, when I get there, yes. We're going to do actually 512, so we'll get there just one moment. Let me log in myself. Okay, so take a moment to either sign in or sign up. I'll give you some starting dimensions in one moment. Supposed to have cool welcome screen, I guess. Okay, here it comes. Okay, so any of this graphic software, whether it's Photoshop or GIMP or anything, I guess even Paint and such, has a learning curve. It's a different sort of mentality as well. If we're very used to the coding aspect, as I work with that, it's like we've seen that there's this syntax, there's a rhythm to it, there's a certain way to do it. But graphic design and working with graphic software is completely different. It's very creative. Obviously, code is creative, but this is just creative in a different way, very visual. And depending on the software, it all lets you do the same thing ultimately, but just to be on the same page, we'll use this. So if you get this welcome screen, we want to create new. If you don't get the welcome screen, you can go up to File, New. I'm going to create a new file. On the right side over here, the file name, I will call it icon, and then later, of course, we need to name it the proper icons. I'm going to call it icon 512, because what I like to do is put, depending on the type of graphic, I like to put the dimensions of it in the file name. So we're going to start with a very large canvas, a very large size of a graphic, so that then we have the leeway to resize it to the right sizes that we need. One trick in graphic design, that is, if you start with a small graphic and try to blow it up, that's going to be a disaster. You start with a small amount of data, which then you want to resize into a larger one. It has to invent data, and it's going to get fuzzy, blurry. Have you ever been to a restaurant, especially these smaller mom and pop shop ones, that you look at the restaurant and like their photo is all pixelated? That's because they started with like a graphic that looked good for the web, but then when they printed it, it didn't have enough data to print properly. So the opposite is, if you start with a large graphic and resize it down to the various sizes that you need, that often works very well. You have data to work with, so then shrink it down to remove data. So we're going to start with 512 size, not inches. We're not dealing with inches here. Change that to pixels.
Are we still on the recent tab?
I'm in the new,
Okay, recent.
in recent, yes. We have a bunch of like templates up here, which could be very useful, but we're just doing it in the recent manual way. So pixels, 512 by 512. We don't quite need that high quality. I'm going to put that back to 72. 300 dots, 300 resolution is for print quality. If I want high quality print, that's basically per inch. I've got 300 dots. Well, we're not quite dealing with monitors. We're dealing with mobile devices. So it is, we are, however, at a transition that there's such high quality, 4K screens and all of that.
Samsung's, you don't think those are like a lot higher than 72?
Yes, but see, also we're starting with a very high quality, 512 pixels that still is going to be resized down. Okay, so 512 by 512, 72, color mode RGB. Then there's a background contents. This is going to create a white background, which we don't want. I said earlier in the note I want a transparent background. Now in my case, this is kind of funny on my screen. This happens every semester. I say click on here and select transparent, but I don't see transparent. My screen is smaller than yours, so I have to scroll down. Do you see that yourself, maybe? So there is a transparent here, but you have to scroll. And unfortunately, I think some of you have the mouse wheel that doesn't work, so hopefully you can scroll. Or I guess you can click on it and then use the arrow keys up and down. We want transparent. So here's my dimensions for this. Whatever name, these sizes, again, we're starting with a very high quality. We saw in Visual Studio we only need 96 by 96 as the largest size at the moment, but this is sort of future-proofing ourselves when we get these bigger and bigger screens and like we're dealing with 4K, so passe. My phone's in 8K. What about yours? So we're dealing with these higher sizes. Resolution 72 and transparent background. So click Create. I'm going to get this screen with a checkerboard pattern, which is the way to represent transparency. Because transparency is invisible, and how are you going to see something invisible? So they show it as a checkerboard. You're then going to save this file. File save as. We'll take a break in a moment. File save as. I'm going to put a copy of mine in the network folder eventually, of course, but I'm going to save in my flash drive. You don't need to put this file anywhere in your actual project folder. I'm just going to put it in my folder for this class, but I'm not putting it in my project folder yet.
Will it cause any problems if you do put it in the folder?
It's kind of just wasting space because it's going to compile this asset, but it's not actually going to be used by the app. So I would put it elsewhere because it's going to save it as a PSD file. It's not even a format that the app will understand. A PSD file is our work in progress file. This is where we can continue to go back and change the graphics and the text and the colors and the gradients and all of that. Ultimately, we need a PNG or PNG file. That is our final file, but our work in progress file, as we work in Photoshop, we want a PSD file, which is still totally editable. Our final PNG file is kind of locked in. I'm not going to be able to change the text anymore easily or the colors and such. It's locked in. But a PSD work in progress file is still fully editable because it has something called layers and such. So I'm saving this to my flash drive. I'm calling it whatever, like icon 512. Make sure it's in Photoshop format. Don't change this to PNG. We'll do that after we design the graphic. All these other settings are there as default. I didn't make any changes, but they should just be there as defaults. Click Save. If it asks about compatibility, Photoshop's been around for like 25 years, and there's different versions throughout the years. So right now we've got 2019, the latest version, but maybe at home you realize I have, 2017. Well, if I want to be able to open up 2019 file in 2017 software, I would want this compatibility on. If I turn it off, I may not be able to open the current generation file in an older generation software. Just click OK. Now, one weird thing about my screen, let me just look at someone else's screen. Do you see a bunch of cool panels and stuff on the edges? See panels, but not mine. Okay. Fine. Oh, there we go. So this is our project file, and what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to make some cool icons for our app. Something better than that, I hope. So it's 7:20. We'll take a break until 7:30. Make sure you've got at least a file open up, and then we'll talk about Photoshop, how it works, some tips about how to make some cool graphics and such, even if you don't have any graphic design experience, and then incorporate it into our app.